Welcome back, everyone. It's just another day in the life as a military wife. And this week I had the opportunity to have a recorded conversation interview with Courtney Siebring, who is a children's author, vocal artist, and military spouse. And it was a lot of fun to talk with her about her new book, her inspiration, and different things, just momness also. And I want to share that conversation with you. You're listening to Life of a Military Wife, and I am your host, Sam Wolf. Okay, before we jump into the interview conversation, I want to share a little bit about Courtney with you. Courtney Siebring is a creative artist, a military wife, currently living in Colorado Springs, Colorado with her husband and daughter. Her devotion to Christ, background in theater, current work as a voice artist and homeschooling mom, and a long time practicing of writing poetry informs how she sees and interacts with the world. Her debut children's book, Little Spark of Life, leans in on a conversation between a pregnant mother and her curious little boy. In a fun and imaginative way, she describes the growing life inside of her while assuring him of his own unique importance. So let's dive in. And I want you, Courtney, to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, just basic intro. Go for it.
Sure. Well, for the purposes of this podcast, I think I should lead with the fact that I'm a military spouse. My husband and I, we've been married for 19 years. And so we've been in the military together for about 19 years. It was, it all happened at the same time. So there's that. I'm also, my background is in theater. I do voiceover now. I homeschool our daughter, a lot of different creative ventures going on. And then, of course, the book that I just wrote and is coming out soon is the latest creative venture for me.
Yeah, I started looking more into the book stuff that you were sending me, and it looks like a really fabulous idea. So there's something really cool, though. You are a military spouse, but you're not the typical military spouse I have on my show. Yes. What's different? Tell everyone what's different about you as a military spouse.
Absolutely. My husband and I are in the Canadian military. So my husband's in the Canadian Air Force, and we've actually been requesting this OutCan posting for quite a while because I am American. I also have Canadian citizenship now, but we've been wanting to get closer to my family for a while. So we've been in Colorado Springs. My husband is working with NORAD and really enjoys it, which is just a bonus for him. You don't always enjoy your postings. We're thoroughly enjoying this one. Yeah, that's the difference. We're Canadian.
Yeah, and that's fabulous. I mentioned before when we were talking that my husband, I don't think people who are outside, for my listeners who are outside of the military, may not be aware of how often the United States military and other militaries work together and how often we have people from other militaries working in the United States with our soldiers, our airmen one-on-one. I know that we very frequently, I grew up in Arizona, and I know Luke Air Force Base very frequently has people from other countries come and train there. When we were stationed at Campbell, we had an Australian officer get embedded with my husband's unit there. My husband's worked in Egypt with a whole bunch of different countries. So I think this is fabulous. It's something that not everyone's always aware of. And even people inside the U.S. military are not always aware of. And I think it's fantastic, especially since it's kind of cool since you are an American. Now you get to station here. So your daughter gets to experience both sides of her family heritage. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. Sure. We're so happy to be here.
And so are you homeschooling your daughter because you're here in the U.S. right now, or have you always been homeschooling? Because that's also another thing my listeners like to hear about.
Yeah, we've always homeschooled. When living in Nova Scotia, there aren't half as many resources as there are here in Colorado. But yeah, we started kindergarten homeschooling, and we had about, I don't know, a semester under our belt when COVID hit. And a lot of people thought, oh, well, nothing has changed for you guys. We're like, no, everything has changed. Everything's changed. Because I think, one of the misnomers is that we're just huddled up in our house, whatever, reading and writing and doing arithmetic. And that's so not the case with my daughter. It's like we were outside and with different groups. And I know different parts of the world responded differently to COVID, but Nova Scotia locked way down. So that changed. When we got here, we decided, okay, let's do a hybrid model because there's so much choice in terms of how you can do things with school in general, but specifically, I'm talking about homeschool, enrichment programs, and all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. So we did that for a while. And then she asked if we could go back to full-time homeschooling. And yeah, I was really happy to accommodate that. So yeah, it's very much year by year. We say that every year. All right, another year. But we have neighbors here who they've always homeschooled, and they've homeschooled because they're military and they just want to keep that sense of consistency for their kids. So yeah, it's so interesting, right, to talk to other people and hear what their reasons are.
Yeah, and the thing is, the reasons and the ways of homeschooling are just as varied as the families. I really don't think any homeschooling, and no two homeschooling situations are exactly identical. And that's part of the beauty of it, is you can find something that is uniquely fitted for your family. So I think that's fantastic.
Thanks.
So I was one of those people who always thought I would homeschool, and then I met my kids and they're like, no, we want to go to school. We want friends. I'm like, okay.
You have to totally consider that as well, right? Like what your kids want. I never thought that I would homeschool. So, I mean, never say never. There are a lot of things I never thought I would do.
Oh, yeah. I never thought I'd be a military wife, and Merry Christmas.
Absolutely. Same.
Yep. So, okay. How we were kind of talking about this, but how do you navigate the military life, the homeschooling, and the career? Because you said you do both, so you do a lot of stuff. How do you manage all of that crazy?
I think, I prioritize. And so for me, the priority is definitely, especially now, our homeschool and my daughter, and being the person that manages the household. And but the cool thing for me about homeschooling is that it is so creative, and my daughter's very creative, and so am I. And so that's something that we bring to it. She was very much a part of the process of me writing this book that we'll talk about a little bit later, Little Spark of Life. She's very much a visual artist. And so it was cool for me to bring her into the process of like choosing the illustrator. And I vividly remember we sat down and we looked through all of these different artist profiles. And I said, okay, well, these are my top picks. What do you like? And I was able to show her, this is what these people do for a living. And you can too, if that's something that you want to do. So I do prioritize. And at the same time, I'd say I integrate. And in terms of the military, this is another thing that's very different about maybe the Canadian military in general, but our story in particular. So my husband is a pilot, and he's a maritime helicopter pilot. He's certainly not doing that in Colorado, flying helicopters, maritime helicopters. But, we didn't really move a lot. We were posted to Halifax, Nova Scotia for 13 years, which is like completely unheard of. And especially I talk to other Canadian military spouses, and yeah, 4 or 5 years you move. I talk to American military spouses every 2-3 years you move. And so that hasn't been our story, which I think has afforded me the ability to kind of plunk down roots. Certainly when we were in Nova Scotia for 13 years, plunk down roots, develop, a community around us, a base, be able to try different things. I did a lot of different things. I taught English as a second language. I taught theater workshops in schools. I did a lot of different things,
Yeah.
I hope
that's awesome. No, that really does. Because I think oftentimes we feel like we have to do everything all at once, and we
Mm,
don't. That is, as wives, just in general, as people, it's important to recognize that there's seasons of our lives, that
absolutely.
there are times where something is going to take priority, and then sometimes it's going to take a back seat. And I was interviewing another military spouse a while ago, and she runs her own business and she makes really great cookies, fantastic cookies. Um, but she was talking about how part of the great part of owning her own business is right now she's about to be a grandma and she wanted to take more time with that. And so she's backing off on her business for a while. And that's not a big deal because it's her business and it's fine and she'll figure it out. But I think it's good to shift between those different life moments and prioritize things differently and to give ourselves that freedom. So that's fantastic. I like that. So you
And I
went into it a little bit before. Oh, go. What do you want to say?
because you brought it up with seasons, and I think it is so important for your listeners to dig into that thought. Location. I mean, that's a big part of, especially in the U.S., being a military spouse, and thinking about the opportunities that just location, that just geography can afford you. Is something to consider. We lived in the middle of Podunk, nowhere, Canada, for 2 years while my husband trained. We lived in it's an actual town. It's called Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. And it's the smallest town that I've ever lived in my life. And while we were there, I wrote for a grant to the Saskatchewan Arts Board to write a play about the base that I lived on because I saw around me so much isolation. It's like we lived on the moon. It was very isolating, but I saw that in the spouses around me. And so I held workshops and I did some interviews and I talked to other spouses and created this play for myself, but for them, basically. It was called Conversations with Airplanes. We lived on this military base, and that's like all you heard were these jets overhead constantly. And we were alone. Because our husbands were working like 17 plus hours a day. I mean, the training is insane. And so it's the story of a woman who's like basically talking to these airplanes and kind of trying to find her place. But I mean, I'm not here to talk about that show. That was ages ago. But just the fact that I would just encourage your listeners to kind of look around where they are and see what just the geography, just the location that they're in can afford them. And yeah, jump into that and say, this is not forever. It's for now. And let's do it.
Yeah. And that's actually something that has happened to me. Like at different duty stations, I've pursued different things because it just fit the time of life and it fit me at that place. So there was different needs. And different locations have different needs and your family has different needs at different times. Okay. That actually, before we get into what I was going to ask you, that sparked and reminded me a question I didn't write down. What are some things you have done voiceover for, or like what are some things you've done before that people may have heard of or are a little more well known, or I don't know, what are some projects you've worked on? Sorry, putting you on the spot there.
No, that's okay. I mean, the bread and butter of voiceover work is like commercial work. And so it'll be local within whatever area. I still do voiceover work for clients back in Halifax. And I mean, with the beauty of the internet, I can do that. But in terms of stuff that your listeners would hear, I'm not so sure. I mean, there are some audiobooks that I've done, some middle grade audiobooks, and like the occasional narration for a television show, but I wouldn't say anything super well known. But I mean,
That's cool.
When you start to plug into it, like anytime you hear a voice, that's voiceover. Like maybe some of your little kids have a talking toy, much to your chagrin. You hear the thing over and over. When my daughter was little, I couldn't hear that talking toy without thinking someone was in a studio recording that voice. I mean, I've had the out of body experience of walking myself through a phone tree that I voiced. Press 1 if you want so-and-so, press 2. Like I'm talking to myself going through this phone tree, pressing 1, pressing 2. So that's kind of funny.
Okay, that is hysterical because I think that would be really, really weird.
Right?
It's cool at the same time. Yeah, and I think sometimes we forget that these are even things we can pursue as military spouses because they're not geographically dependent with our modern day and age. I've
Yeah.
started listening to audiobooks with my kids, and my daughter's like, "Wait, I could read books for a living?" I'm like, "Yes, yes, you could."
Yes, you go, girl. You can.
So my daughter has now realized there's all these possibilities where she could get paid to read books to people. So,
Hey, I love it.
all right. So going back to what I was going to ask before we got on all that, so you explained a little bit before your daughter was part of the inspiration for the book. Tell us more about the book, the process, all of that.
Yeah, the book is called Little Spark of Life. It leans in on a conversation between a very pregnant mom and her very curious little boy. And it's more or less her explaining in a fun and an imaginative way with lots of word pictures what's going on inside of her. And so my daughter, since about the age of 3, has been obsessed with all things pregnancy and childbirth. It's just a fascination of hers, and it still is. This morning, she's drawing like a comic strip of like a pregnant woman and the development happening, you know. So she was my muse for that. Part of the reason was because, you know, I was looking for books for her on the topic that were age appropriate, but not just age appropriate, that were books that she and I would naturally be drawn to. So either quirky characters or really beautiful illustrations, rich language. And so I wrote this more or less in a style that I thought she and I would enjoy sitting down. So, I mean, yeah, there's the science in it, but also the imagination and the heart. Yeah, so that's part of it. Another part of it is around the time that I wrote the book, my husband and I became involved in the pro-life movement in Halifax, Nova Scotia, locally where we were. And it's kind of an interesting story where we were on a month-long trip together in the camper. And after we put our daughter to bed, we were noticing for about a week or so that we would kind of disappear. He would go to the front of the camper, I would go to the back of the camper. And so after a while, we checked in on each other, like, are you okay? Like, you know, we call getting on the internet and getting lost called lost in the vortex. Like, are you lost in the vortex? Are you doing okay? And come to find out, he and I separately and unbeknownst to each other, we were researching abortion legislation in the United States and in Canada. And we were just reading up on it. And we were watching videos from organizations like Live Action and Students for Life, and just kind of educating ourselves on the issue. And we became involved from that experience, became involved in our local pro-life community, which is part of the impetus behind the book as well, just to highlight how precious life is. And that's something you may or may not want to
No,
include.
it's fine. Honestly, life is precious. You and I have talked about this a little bit. I've got 3 older kids, and then, as my listeners know, I had a surprise baby recently. And when I had my younger kids, they were all kind of younger, and I didn't get a whole lot of in-depth questions about what was going on with mommy because they were a lot younger. But they're older kids now. And the amount of questions we got during this last pregnancy was profound. Thankfully, I have a degree in family life science. I've taken an entire class on infant development. So I knew how to explain things, and I've even taken a class on adolescent development. Like, I knew how to explain things in an age appropriate way, but I really was hoping it would have been nice to have a book. It would have been nice to have something I could sit down, something with, that was a little bit more approachable instead of just mommy explaining things. So that's why when I heard about your book, I'm like, oh, I like this. Because the one book we did find, the military counselor at the school gave us was fine, but it had like paragraphs of text. And it was good, but my kids are not going to sit and listen to that. Like, it was just too much information all at once.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm just looking through here. I mean, the book Little Spark of Life is written in verse. And like I said, I mean, it goes through the stages of development while simultaneously encouraging the boy that she already has, that he's an individual and he's unique and there's no one else like him. You're right. It is helpful to have that book. It's like that third person or third object in the room that the focus is on. And especially with a topic like this, I mean, I think that parents can use the book in many different ways, that they see fit. Just reading it, going through it, using it as a springboard to talk about where babies come from, use it as a springboard to talk about how unique and special, their child that they're reading to is. But yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate you saying that. It's encouraging to me to be like, yeah, there is a place for it.
Oh yeah, there's definitely an audience for this. And then the other balance you always have when you're having another kid is what you brought up, is making sure that your children you already have don't feel like they're being replaced or they're less important or anything like that. All my friends kept joking. They're like, oh, is, so-and-so, my youngest kid, going to be the jealous toddler? I'm like, well, he's well past toddler stage, so hopefully not. My puppy's our jealous toddler. Our puppy cannot handle the baby. But the kids have really responded really well, and I'm grateful to that. But I'm just thinking, I had all these resources because I've had all this education. Not all moms have pursued those educations, have different backgrounds, different expertise, and different skills. So it's wonderful for parents who may not know how to approach that to have something, but to have something that's really kid-friendly, very kid-friendly.
Absolutely. And I mean, the target audience for the book is ages 4 to 8. And I was thinking the other day, I was talking to one of my daughter's little friends about it. She's like, well, I'm 9. And I said, it's for a wider range than that. Depending on who you're speaking to, you can use it in many different ways, Yeah.
Yeah. And you were telling me a little bit about how you got published. Share that with the audience, because I know there's people who, I wish I could write a book or whatever, but what was your experience like?
Yeah, my experience was that doors that I couldn't possibly have opened were opened for me. So I wrote this book, like the first draft of the manuscript. It's a poem, to be honest. It's written in verse, and I wrote it 4 or 5 years ago. And I started to see potential for an opportunity just a couple of years ago, shortly after we moved here. So to make a really long story short, I was part of an equine assisted learning program for parents. And it was a very small group of moms that would meet. One of them was a writer, and she and I became friends, and we started talking about writing. And in her generosity, she invited me over, and I showed her the manuscript, and she said, yeah, this is good. Let's send it to my editor. And so we did. And that was my first rejection. They said, yeah, love it. We don't have a place for a book that's written in verse. And I said, okay. And I didn't really pursue it beyond that. And then a week later, this friend called me and said, hey, listen, I have an acquisition editor that's asking me if I have any children's books. I don't. So I'm going to send her your way. So it was through that relationship that I got my foot in the door, to be honest. And yeah, I mean, the rest is history. But for people who are listening who are writers, part of the process for a lot of writers is writing and putting it away and sitting on it for a while. And even after publishing happens, I mean, that story can continue in terms of writing another manuscript, even though you're out there and sitting on it and waiting for someone to pick it up. So, yeah. But yeah, my story is different. I didn't, have to bang down doors. And so I think that's probably not the typical way, but I'm certainly grateful for it.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, when there's a demand and you've got, you can meet I think that was a really fortuitous timing. I think there was definitely some intervention divine intervention on the timing on that, because you had something, and obviously there's a market. Trust me, I've looked. There's a market for books like that. But it just got me thinking of L.L. Montgomery, who wrote the Anne of Green Gables books. And Anne of Green Gables almost never happened because she wrote down a little idea, threw it into a shoebox, stuffed it into the bottom of her closet. And then years later, when she was trying to think of book ideas, because her publisher's like, okay, what are you writing next? She went through the shoebox and found this little note of, and it was the whole basic concept: orphan, brother and sister, elderly couple, go to adopt, want a boy, get a girl, what happens? And that's all she'd written. And then we got all of these wonderful, fabulous books. And I love the Anne of Green. So when you said Nova Scotia and Halifax, I'm like, oh my gosh, you lived a place I want to see. My daughter loves those books now, and so we want to go there. And I was just like, oh, so jealous. To have lived there would have been probably fabulous.
It was great. It was. And this, what you're saying about the Anne of Green Gables books, it goes back to seasons, right? It goes back to seasons of life. And sometimes it's time and sometimes it's not. And we live in a culture that's like now. And, you've aged out of whatever this or that opportunity is. And it's such a lie. It's such a lie. There's no age label, or no expiry date on pursuing a dream that you have, or an interest that you have. There's no expiry date on that.
And I hope that's what, besides everything else, I really want everyone to check out your book, but I really hope that all of you listening kind of take that in, that there's these dreams. Writing a book is, you've been married for almost 19 years, you said? Yeah. Yes. So, my husband and I have been married for 13 years. Neither of us are in our 20s. If you can do math, none of us are, but we're all pursuing things. I just started a podcast. You're becoming an author. It's okay. You know what? Yeah. Start something new. You move to a new place, try something new.
Love it.
So, all right. Before we wrap it up, I want you to let everyone know about your book signing and the book release date and where they can find it and all of that.
Absolutely. So the book officially launches September 12th. The best way to find information about the book is at the book website. So that's www.littlesparkoflifebook.com. And through that website, you can order from Paraclete Press. It's also available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and wherever books are sold. There is a signing for your local listeners. There's a signing that's coming up in Colorado Springs, and it's going to be at Forestgate Church, which is just north of the city. And it's on Sunday, September 24th from 4:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. So they can get their copies and bring them to the signing, and I'd be happy to meet them and sign the book. I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited about meeting people who are enjoying the book.
Yes. And I'm working on seeing if we can also get her to do a story hour on the south side of town. So for anyone who's not familiar with Colorado Springs, there's military everywhere, because we've got the Academy, we've got Peterson, we've got Shreveport, we've got NORAD, we've got Carson. So there's military everywhere. And we're going to see if we can get her in in another location for anyone who can't make it to that one. But that's not set in stone. So try to make it to her signing in person. It's Sunday, September 24th, you said? Mark your calendars. I will be, for anyone who didn't catch it, you don't have to worry about rewinding. I will post it on the Facebook. I will be posting it in the links to the book website in the description for this episode. Thank you for joining me with my conversation, and I hope you take the time to look into Courtney's book, and that you have a wonderful week. As always, you're listening to Life of a Military Wife, and I am your host, Sam Wolf.